Hello, everyone. We're here today to discuss some new products. It's always exciting when we get to do that, especially, ones that are as exciting as these. I'll go ahead and introduce everyone on the call. We've got Dale Baskin.
Howdy, howdy.
We've got Abby Ferguson.
Hello.
And we've got Richard Butler.
Hi.
And I'm Mitchell. So let's go over today the new Canon EOS R6 III. Richard, could you tell us a little bit about this and sort of where it falls in the market?
Yeah, it's, as the name implies, it's an update to the R6 II. It actually shares quite a lot of the on-paper specs with the R6 II, so still shoots at 40 frames per second with electronic shutter, 12 frames per second with mechanical shutter, but the big difference is this is now a 33 megapixel camera rather than 24.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the big updates. A lot of stuff around video as well, which we will cover in a bit, but I want to get everyone's baseline experience here. I know most of us have shot with the R6 II. Dale and Abby, what's your experience with that camera and the R6 line in general?
My experience with the Canon 6 series actually goes back quite a ways, all the way back to the original, the 6D that came out, the DSLR, the R6, the R6 II, and I haven't actually seen the R6 III in person yet, so I'm looking forward to that.
It's not in person, but over camera. It looks very familiar, I'm sure.
Yeah, and on my end, I got the chance to review the R6 II at my previous writing job for Popular Photography. So got the chance to use it there. It was actually my first time kind of doing a major camera review. So that was exciting.
Yeah, I reviewed both the R6 and the R6 II for DPReview. I was also involved in the 6D2 review, and I remember this 6D coming out quite well. So I've used a lot of Canon's enthusiast level cameras. And to be honest, that's kind of my level as a photographer. I'm lucky enough to get to use super high-end pro cameras from time to time, but it's the ones sort of around or preferably below $2,000 that I would personally shoot myself. So they're the ones I always pay particular attention to.
Yeah, so I guess to go into some of the changes, Richard, you mentioned that 33 megapixel sensor. It's not sort of like a partially stacked sensor like we've seen in other cameras in this range, like in the Z6 II and S1 II, the Nikon Z6 III and the Panasonic S1 II. But it is sort of quite quick, so we're getting reasonable or more than reasonable rolling shutter rates in video, and it can shoot full width 4K 120p, which is not an option on any of the other cameras in this price range. You generally have to accept a bit of a crop, and that comes with the ability to also shoot pre-capture without sort of the weird raw burst mode that you had to jump into with the R6 II. Could you explain sort of what that was and the workflow around that?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I do remember the workflow for that. It's been a while since I've actually used the R6 II, and I have not had hands-on time with R6 III. I remember there being something kind of finicky and having to jump through hoops is maybe aggressive, but having to do some sort of workaround, but that's the extent of what I remember.
I feel like that's a fair way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, as I remember it created sort of bundles of RAW files. It couldn't shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time. It created this sort of bundle of RAW files that you had to use Canon's own DPP software to extract the frame you wanted. And yeah, it was just a bit of a faff. It very much felt like it was something added on later. And indeed, from memory, I think it was. I think it came in firmware after the launch.
The thing we all know about manufacturer software is that it is very high quality, a pleasure to use. Everyone enjoys sort of working with the files with it.
It always runs so smoothly. It's just so efficiently coded. Actually, in fairness, Canon's DPP software is some of the least bad. I'm not going to... I can't bring myself to be... I mean, comparatively, there are other versions, some of which are built on a piece of software I don't think exists anymore. I'm not going to be rude about Silky Pix. But it was very, very slow and very, very awkward. And, you could just sit there losing the will to live, which is not really what the photo editing experience is supposed to be like.
So yeah, that you used to have to do that raw burst workflow for pre-capture. Now you don't. It's just an option in the menus when you are shooting at the high plus 40 frames per second electronic shutter mode. So hooray for that. The video modes, though, I think are what get the biggest upgrade because this camera has essentially everything you've come to expect from sort of modern hybrid stills video camera. It has open gate recording. It has internal RAW to a CF Express card, which is also new. The previous version had 2 SD card slots. This one now has 1 SD card slot and the CF Express Type B. And it's got sort of most of the view assistance features you would want, like false color and log preview, sort of going to Rec 709, so you're not looking at a super flat washed out image that can be hard to judge exposure on. Richard, could you talk a little bit, I know we always go to you for this, even though you are not necessarily the biggest fan of it, but about why open gate is something that appeals to some video shooters?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is being offered simply because they can. This sensor reads out quickly enough that you can sensibly scan the entire sensor at a fast enough rate to make the video more than usable. So part of it is in there simply because, well, we can do it, why wouldn't we? Now, historically, OpenGate was often used to give you some flexibility in terms of cropping into the scene, moving that crop around to add a little bit of motion during the edit. But thanks to smartphones and the fact that some YouTube likes nice wide frame and Instagram and TikTok like a vertical frame, well, if you shoot 3:2, you can take both crops out of the same piece of footage, which can be incredibly useful, though is a bit of a headache in terms of composition, because the composition that works for your vertical doesn't necessarily work for your landscape shot and vice versa. But in terms of speed of workflow, it means you're not trying to shoot the same clip again and again and again, which is someone who can stumble over literally my own name when a camera is pointed at me, is incredibly valuable.
Some other improvements with this camera is that Canon has said that they have improved the autofocus even further. Now, I think we can all agree the autofocus on the R6 II, pretty sufficient, like not bad at all, right?
I found the autofocus on the R6 II to be not just sufficient, but actually really good. And to the point where even today, if I pick up the R6 II and shoot it, I don't have any qualms about the autofocus system. It's very responsive.
Yeah, I do remember us having a few problems with autofocus in video, where it could occasionally become really interested in the background and just sort of drift away and just go, "Hey, have you seen this? Have you seen these mountains? Have you seen this brick wall?" So I'm hoping that that's been sort of tuned out, but yeah, they are promising improved autofocus. It does have the people priority focus mode that was first introduced in the EOS R3, so you can train the camera and sort of say, look, this is the person I'm going to be trying to photograph, and that way, if it has to choose between two faces in a scene, it's supposed to prioritize the one that you've trained it to prioritize.
Yeah, that's super useful. I know I haven't gotten to test a bunch with the video autofocus. I do know that it gets the full suite of autofocus features, including subject recognition. It can recognize people, animals, including horses is a specific thing they call out in the manual, which I find is very funny. So people, animals, and vehicles. You get that even in the 4K 120 mode, which is not the case for some other cameras. I know the Panasonic S1 II specifically, you are losing the subject recognition in 4K 120, and again, that comes with the crop, where it doesn't on the R6 III. So if you're into shooting, really slow motion video of animals, it's got you covered there. So, sort of more broadly speaking, I'd be interested in hearing, how do you feel this camera compares to the rest of the cameras in this market? So that's like the Nikon Z6 III, the Sony A7 IV, and the Panasonic S1 II. And I think the Sony A7 IV is a really interesting place to start, just because it also has a 33 megapixel sensor. And I think, Abby, you're not a 4 shooter, but you are a 3 shooter?
Correct. I did it wasn't a full review, but I did do some hands-on stuff with the 4 when it first came out, which has been a bit now. That came out in what year? It's been 4 years, 5 years? 4
I
years.
want to say it came out in 2019, which would make it 6 years.
Oh, I was even undershooting. Okay.
Boy, is it that old? Wow.
Yeah.
I thought it was 2021, I must admit. But
Well, the other
yeah,
possibility
it's
is I'm just older.
it's not recent.
No, it's not recent.
So October 2021.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So only 4 years.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been a bit since I used the 4, but I mean, I remember really enjoying the camera, and it seems, at least on paper, it seems like the R6 III has a lot in common with that, but it being 4 years newer surely is going to offer some improvements in terms of autofocus and video specs and things like that.
Yeah, I have to say the Sony a7 IV was a bit of an odd one. It jumped up to a higher resolution, but the sensor wasn't really any faster than the cameras that it was competing with. So in practice, it ended up having more rolling shutter than anything else on the market, which was a bit of an odd choice on Sony's part. You know, great for photography. You know, bit of a resolution boost, but actually, if anything, it was a sensor less well suited to video capture, which was an unexpected direction. Since then, we've seen the Z6 III, which has a much, much faster sensor, and then the rather more expensive Panasonic S1.2, which has a variation of the same sensor, but seems to be being used more cleverly. So there's less of an image quality trade-off to the video. But the Z6 III really raised the bar in terms of sort of speed of video, the fact that it could shoot raw video internally in a number of different flavors, and building on top of the fact it had much improved autofocus over its predecessor. So it had really, really strong features for stills, really strong performance for video. It was just a really, really good all-rounder. And that's really where this class is at. We're getting to the stage where these cameras really will do anything you ask of them, whether it's still shooting, whether it's video capture, whether it's action, landscape. You really have to need the extra resolution. You really have to need the sort of pro workflow tools to make it worth moving up to something like the EOS R5 II or the Nikon Z8. Those cameras certainly offer more and they cost more, but for enthusiast shooters, the amount of camera you now get for sort of $2,500 is quite striking.
Yeah, I do think the video component is the really interesting part of this camera to me. I mean, if you looked at the original R6 III, I guess not the original, but sorry, I'm getting my names mixed up, the R6 II that came out a few years ago. I mean, that was a competent video camera as well, very competent still shooter. If I compare this camera to its predecessor, it, at least on paper, because I haven't used it yet, the changes on the photography side are evolutionary. They're not revolutionary. The jump in megapixels to 33, honestly, I'm not sure how big a difference that makes. 33 megapixels is not that much more resolution than it sounds like on paper. So it's a marginal increase in resolution. So I'm not sure if I was an R6 II owner that I would necessarily jump at the upgrade just for photography. But if I was really into video, I might. I mean, the fact that this camera has 7K open gate recording, that it can do 4K 60p using the full sensor. Actually, the previous one could too, but I guess now it could do 4K 120. Is that correct?
Yes, and it can do oversampled 4K 60p as well.
Oversampled 4K 60p,
which is actually something
yes,
that the R5 II can't even do, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so I just feel like if I was an R6 II owner, if I was looking to upgrade, the thing that would actually compel me to upgrade are the improved video features. The open gate is great. Like one thing I wish Canon would do, it would be really cool, is if they could also include anamorphic de-squeeze with that. But not all cameras that have open gate offer that. And realistically, most people who are probably shooting on anamorphic lenses probably aren't choosing this camera to do it anyway. So I don't think it's that big a deal, although it would be cool if they could.
I would say this is the one place where I think Canon's famous segmentation starts to creep in, because I believe you can do that on the EOS C50, which is sort of the cinema camera built around this sensor. And that also has the ability to shoot in shutter angle instead of shutter speed, which this does not, something that both Nikon and Panasonic offer. So, you'll find little things here and there, but I think another underrated video upgrade for this is the full-size HDMI versus a micro one on the 2, which I've always found to be quite a hateful little connector versus the very robust full-size HDMI.
And the risk of sort of advocating for the idea of segmentation, I think the number of people actually buying and using anamorphic lenses who aren't then involved in some sort of paid production and can't stretch to the C50. I'm not sure how many R6 II users are desperate to use anamorphic lenses, which, for those who aren't familiar, basically have a wider focal length horizontally than vertically, so they sort of squeeze the footage in one direction. And the idea is that historically you'd project using the same sort of lens and stretch it back out again, or in digital you can just digitally stretch your image out. It's a way of getting widescreen video footage on a non-widescreen, on a non-wide sensor or piece of film. It's usually shot on 4:3, I believe, rather than 3:2, which is why Panasonic's GH series have offered this for years. Very, very video-focused cameras. Sure, it'd be nice to have, but it doesn't feel like an essential in what is essentially a mass market, photo first, photo and video hybrid, as opposed to video and photo hybrid.
There was a time when, to get an anamorphic lens, you'd have to go to Cooke or Panavision or like ARRI, and they have come down in price substantially. It used to be like, oh, you're paying $20,000 for a lens because it's a cinema lens, and you can get them for much cheaper than that now, around $1,000, and that has led to some enthusiasts using them. But I agree that it's probably not. Canon has told me specifically that this is still a very stills focused camera, even though most of the updates are in video. They still view this as like something that still shooters are really, really going to appreciate. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and ultimately you could, if push came to shove, you could shoot anamorphic on it. Just framing would be a bit of a nightmare because you wouldn't be able to see, what your footage is going to look like re-expanded. But yeah, no, I can't imagine anyone at Canon, or that many potential customers, are losing sleep over its omission.
I do think you mentioned sort of the segmentation between it and the R5 II. I think there's an interesting thing that's happened where with the resolution bump, you're now looking at, less segmentation than there used to be. With Nikon, you've got the 24 megapixel Z6 III and the 40-ish megapixel Z8. And that's
45, I think.
45. And the gap between the R6 III and the R5 II is now smaller than it used to be. And in terms of speed, the R6 or the R5 II has a stacked sensor, so it is much faster. But it's, for video, not that much faster than this. So unless you really need a lot of the pro features there, like eye control or action priority, it's going to be a tough sell to jump up to that, especially given how much more expensive the R5 II is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mitchell, for the difference in price and the encroachment of features on the R6 III. I do feel like this is more ambiguous segmentation than I'm used to seeing from Canon, who is generally very regimented about the process. Though, make no mistake, it's still segmented.
Richard, could you jump in real quick, because I know you've talked to Canon about this, why we don't see features like action priority on this camera?
Yeah, so it's interesting that action priority isn't in this camera, and part of that may well be just that it was a very expensive feature to develop. It's primarily aimed at pro sports cameras, and this is not supposed to be a pro sports camera. It's easy to criticize segmentation, but if Canon puts all of its pro sports features in a camera that costs $2,800, then suddenly you don't sell any sort of $3,500, and up cameras, or you sell significantly fewer, and that makes it very hard to then invest in the R&D to develop these features in future. If you let pros use if pros can get away with using the mid-level cameras, then it's very hard to justify developing another one. But also in this case, that we did ask them whether they expected action priority to be a feature that would trickle down through the range in the coming years, and they said at present there's a hardware and a battery challenge to that. Both the R5 II and the R1 have a more powerful processor in them, and in the case of the R1, a much bigger battery. The head of Canon's camera division, Go Takura, said he'd really like to see this feature trickle down the range, but that the engineers were sort of saying, look, it's not that easy. I'm not that surprised to see that the feature doesn't appear in this latest model.
Yeah, just for a size comparison, this is the battery from the R1. It is. I think you'd have a tough time fitting that in this camera here.
Yeah, the R5 II does use the same battery as the R6 III, so it's primarily, I believe, about that extra processor. But yeah, also, I think it took quite a lot of work, finding literally millions of pieces of footage and tagging them to say, okay, this is the frame where the striker is about to take the kick. This is the point at which the striker does take the kick, just before a goal is scored. It takes immense amount of effort to tag up literally, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of clips of setups to goals being scored in order to train an AI model to go, oh, this is what the build up to a goal looks like. So I can understand they'd want to recoup some of that R&D cost before just going, oh yeah, everyone has this now.
Keen-eared listeners would have heard you say that it is a $2,800 camera, and that is the price, that's how much it's selling for. For a little bit of context, the Z6 III costs right around that, as does the A7 IV after tariffs. Panasonic S1 II is a little bit more, I believe that's around $3,200, but sort of most importantly, the R6 II launched around $2,500. I feel like for $200, you're getting a lot for that money in terms of features over the R6 II.
Yeah, and I think that's not the most interesting thing that strikes me with regard to the price. What's really interesting to me is where it fits in with those peers. And I may be remembering wrong, but my recollection is that when the R6 II launched, it was actually a few $100s on the more expensive end compared to a lot of its peers at the time. And the fact that the R6 III is landing closer to the middle of the pack, I think that's really interesting from a pricing perspective, because Canon has often held that slight premium on their cameras.
In fairness, before tariffs, the Z6 III was a fair bit cheaper.
Yeah, you're right. The R6 II launched for $2,500 at a time when its immediate peers at the time, the Z6 II and the I think A7 III were both around 2,000. So there definitely was that bump in price. But the Sony A7 IV, I seem to remember, also launched for $2,500. It made our under $2,000 buying guide an absolute headache to update. Do you include those cameras that are clearly direct competitors or not? So they set the bar at sort of $2,500. The Z6 III arrived for $2,500 and is now its list price has crept up from there, though there are also discounts, so you get it. Pricing is always fun. But sort of the fact that it's still in that sort of $2,500-ish, the fact it's under $3,000 comes as something of a surprise to me. We've seen a lot of escalation of prices for obvious reasons in the US, and the fact that this isn't more expensive is a pleasant surprise.
Now, worth noting, Canon is still trying to keep the ladder, because I believe the R8, which is sort of the camera that comes in under this, sells for substantially less. However, the R6 II is staying in the lineup, and they've told us not staying in the lineup as in, we're selling it until stock runs out, but they intend to continue making it for at least a little while longer. Sort of Sony style, because I think you can still buy the A7 III from them. And that's going to presumably move a bit down in terms of price and be sort of the mid-range camera instead of the high-end mid-range camera that the R6 III is.
and that's going to be, depending on what price it drops to, that's going to be something of a bargain because, the R8, doesn't have image stabilization. It does miss out on a couple of the features from the R6 II. The R6 II is certainly a nicer camera. I mean, it's got AF joystick. It's which has
reasonable battery.
I couldn't remember whether the R8 got the better battery. I remember it got at least one feature that was missing from the RP, but still, if they find room between the cost, and the R8 was always destined to be, a really competitive. It's clearly built to a price, and again, that's, it's easy to bitch about segmenting, but that's how the R8 is able to be so cheap, by missing out some of the features from the R6 II. Sorry, I sound like I'm big fan of segmentation. I'm not, but I've learned enough about economics to just go, actually, it does benefit some people. Yeah. The R8 has a load of features cut out. The R6 II is still a pretty damn competitive camera. The R6 III certainly has some nicer stuff to it, but I think depending on how low the price drops, there are going to be an awful lot of people who get a lot of camera for a very sensible amount of money if the price drops significantly on the R6 II.
Yeah, I would argue for a lot of people it would probably make more sense, or just as much sense, to wait for the cheaper price on the R6 II and just get that and not get the more expensive R6 III.
Absolutely, and we ended up saying something very similar with the Nikon Z5 II versus the Z6 III. The Z6 III is a better camera in almost every regard, but to a degree, it's better in a way that not everybody is going to need. And the Z5 II is so competitively priced. You just go, actually, a lot of people are just going to be just as happy with the Z5 II. And I think the R6 II is going to make really interesting competition to the Z5 II, depending on how cheap they can sell it.
And in fact, even today, the R6 II, I haven't looked at your most recent version of the buying guide, Mitchell, but the R6 II has historically been one of the top picks in our buying guide for that category.
It's number 2.
Yeah, exactly. And it continues to be there. So it's not a deficient camera in any way. It's a really solid camera. If the R6 III didn't come along, we'd still be recommending the R6 II to these users. So I think that's a great analysis, Richard, is whether or not people actually need that extra level of camera in that category, I don't know. But for a lot of people, I think the R6 II is going to become a very good option.
I know a lot of y'all are going to want it, though.
I was going to say, I think that was Abby's analysis, not mine. I was just agreeing with her.
Yeah, like there's the need, what you actually need, and realistically, I think you said this in your review, Richard. It's like most of us do not need more camera than the O5 or the Z5 too.
It doesn't mean we don't want it, but need and want are two different things, obviously.
So speaking of things that we despeately want,
that's exactly the segue I was about to make.
Not the only
nicely
camera.
done.
Not the only thing that Sony or that Canon has introduced today. Richard, could you tell us what else they're announcing?
Okay, so this is the new Canon RF 45mm F1.2 STM.
Sorry, what was that? What was that aperture number again?
So F1.2, so it allows all of the light, any of the light in your room will get gladly sucked into this lens. That's definitely how light works.
Are you sure that's an F1.2 lens? Because that looks really small to be an F1.2 lens.
Well, you may think the size is small, but wait till you hear the price. Okay, let's... Mitchell, you already know the answer, so I'm not going to let you play. But Dale, how much do you think? How much would you pay for this 45mm f1.2 lens?
Is this The Price is Right? Do I get to go to the Showcase Showdown or whatever?
I don't know. We'd have to stop this recording and somebody explain US game shows from the 1970s to me first. So,
well, I mean, just knowing it's an f1.2, 45 millimeters. I mean, shot in the dark. Knowing they're probably targeting it at a lower priced audience, I'd probably guess $1,200.
Okay. And Abby, your guess?
I would guess right around 1,000.
Okay.
Real quick, the Sony or the Canon RF 50mm f1.2L is $2,600.
Yeah, that's it. They are very clear. This is not an L lens in any sense of the word. It's not the sort of. very best optical performance they can give. It's not weather sealed. It's but it's not $2,600. It is $469.95. Yes, that's the reaction I was expecting. Abby.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
No, it is. It is a very competitively priced lens.
What year is this?
Well, it's the future, because no one's ever been able to produce an f1.2 at that kind of price before. It's
Are they selling this as a kit? I mean, that sounds like a fantastic kit combination.
They haven't listed it as one of the kit options that I've seen, but yeah, I suspect this lens is going to cause as much excitement as the camera, if not more, on today, I guess. We're recording this in the past.
So rolling the clock back a bit, 12-year-old Mitchell, little child, having his mom buy a Canon T3. I got with that what was colloquially known at the time as a 50-50, which is the 50mm F1.8. And that lens costs, I think, around $89 to $100. This obviously costs more than that, but you are getting a substantially faster lens. And I assume slightly more modern autofocus, as in not from the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where you're going with that comparison. I'm a little bit, nervous to make it, because I don't want to suggest that inflation is such that what used to cost $100 now costs nearly $500.
Have we done the math though? Like, it might.
But this is a much more ambitious lens. But I can see, it has that role. It has that sort of, we'll just give you a taste of what it's like to shoot with an f1.2 lens, just within your price range. And then you just go, oh, actually, that's really nice, isn't it?
Are you suggesting this is a gateway drug for fast lenses?
I was going to say it's a gateway lens.
That was the phrase I was very, very carefully tiptoeing around.
The jump up to the non-gateway ones, though, is going to be
I know, when you move up to the
substantial.
hard stuff, it gets expensive.
Painful.
But even so, I think if, a 45 f1.2, that's very close to being, 43mm is the diagonal of a full-frame sensor, so a 43mm lens offers the same perspective as the human eye. Neither zoomed in nor wide angle. So this is actually closer to being a normal lens than a 50, which makes it very quite a handy all-round focal length. I don't think it's going to be the quickest to focus. It's just arrived minutes ago, but. Let me see if I can demonstrate this. Quite a lot of that focus unit is moving around within the lens. Actually, I'll have to.
So it doesn't sound like it's the lens you want to get if you're shooting a lot of fast action with a lot of autofocus performance required. But I mean, my God, for that price, f1.2 on a 45mm is crazy.
I mean, for most portrait photographers, that's the autofocus speed is probably going to be enough.
Yeah, as long as you're not shooting like children, right? Because they move around a ton, or pets,
Sure, potentially.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of
gonna
movement.
move away.
That is a lot of movement.
But it occurs to me, I don't own any Canon RF cameras, but I could actually buy that lens and certain Canon RF cameras, and together would cost less than a lot of other 1.2 lenses.
Oh yeah. Oh, by a long shot. I'm actually just excited sort of to shoot with it, because there's not another 44mm RF lens, right? I think that's sort of probably gotta be one of the first. I'm not familiar with any other ones.
Yeah, there isn't anything around this focal length. Well, there are 50s obviously, and it's not going to be radically different from a 50. But yeah, it's a comparison to the 50 affair. But I have to say, I'd be much more excited about this than there's a 50 f1.2 macro STM.
I believe it's the 1.8. Yeah, the 51.8 macro STM. Or is it? It might be f2. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's 2 or 1.8.
Yeah, I lose track. I've never been a big fan of the RF STM lenses, so it'll be interesting to see how this performs. But you can forgive an awful lot if it gives you that aperture and that price.
Well, interestingly, that's a similar tack that Nikon has been taking as well, because they have their I think a 35 and a 50 1.4s that are sort of not branded as S's. For more money you get the 1.8 in those focal lengths, but it's extremely sharp. No chromatic aberration. Unless it's like a really harsh situation. Like the 1.8s are really, really nice lenses, but they don't have a lot of character. Whereas they say, the 1.4, it's like, oh, it's the character lens, which really means it has a lot of aberrations and may be a bit soft around the corners.
In fact, that's an interesting question. Richard, I know you haven't had much time with this lens yet. You probably just unboxed it, but do we have any sense, either guidance from Canon or from playing around with it, to indicate whether this is a lens that we should expect character from, or if we expect it to be more of a high-performing lens?
They certainly didn't express it in those terms. Let's see. Literally, my notes from when we were first briefed on it, lightweight, high IQ. So
a very smart lens.
Sorry, what's that?
A very smart lens, basically.
Yeah. But it's going to be interesting to see how it performs. I mean, I have to assume it's not going to be up to the same level as the 50 F1.2L, because otherwise it wouldn't cost, a fifth as much. But it's going to be interesting to see whether it's got the whole kind of dreamy, kind of soft, is it in focus, kind of character that that DSLR era F1.2 lenses had. If it's somewhere between that and the ludicrously sharp, wide open F1.2s that everyone is now magically making, it's going to be a really interesting addition to the lens, range. I don't remember being this excited about a new lens in quite some time. It's going to be fun to play with.
A full frame lens, because I feel like you get this excited for the APS-C, the fast APS-C zooms all the time.
I just get excited that anyone's releasing APS-C.
We all have our things. I get excited every time there's a fast ultra wide, but I think an affordable f1.2 is not something to gloss over.
I think the size is really going to be an interesting aspect of that, because that's about the size of like a 1.8 or a 1.4.
It's a very, very good. That is a reasonable size for a combination. That's not much bigger than, let's say, a DSLR and an 85mm f1.4 back in the day. Well, yeah, because that's this isn't DSLR, but this is an 85 1.4, and honestly, I thought this was small. I actually sold this to, not like this particular model, but I was at a wedding the other day, and the wedding photographer was like, "Oh yeah, I've been considering it." I was like, "You should hold it." Is that the VCM? The 1.4
yes,
VCM?
yeah, the new one.
I do like that, except for the aperture ring.